Logic is limits. Logic equals limits. So, of course, in a safe way, you guys, you know what I'm talking about. But we are limiting ourselves if we think too logically. And conventional wisdom, if you look up definitions for conventional and conventional wisdom, you have ordinary, commonplace, lacking originality. So we don't want to fall into this category, and especially not when we're pricing our properties. Now, this is going to come up. We're going to talk next about, we have clients who want to purchase a property, and again, we have concerns that the property is outside the scope of what it would appraise for. And then what do we do with that? Okay, so let me get rid of this here. And I can't remember who had the scenario this week. Let's see. But here's a few things that you need to look at when you are, so we talked about listings, but we're going to talk about our buyers now. So if we're going to go represent a buyer and they want to put an offer on a property, say the property, and I think this was the price point, but the property was listed at like $720. And I think, gosh, if I remember right, it was somewhere, I think she was saying she was comping it somewhere around like the 640 to 660 range, something of that nature. And so she wasn't feeling comfortable encouraging her clients to put an offer on a property at 720 when this was the range that it was comping in. Okay, so there's a little research that you have to do to get to the point of like, what do you do in this situation, and do you encourage them to make an offer? So the first thing is, you can apply the same things that we just talked about, the same 5 steps, to this process as well. You've got to think outside the box on this, but what's important to know is when we talk about the market, whether or not our logical brain says this number is too high and it's only worth 660, that's the logical part of our brain. But the illogical part of our existence right now, and especially the way the market is okay, we understand that it probably wouldn't appraise for this, but what are people paying for in the market today? Because if you think it's worth 660, but it sells for 720, this now becomes a new comparable, and the next property that goes up for sale, they're going to list at 720. And then that one's going to go over that. So as much as we want to protect our clients, we're actually protecting them by gauging what's going to happen after this deal doesn't happen or does happen. The longer we wait right now in the market, the worse the prices are getting. And I don't know if you had any clients that over the last couple of years said, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait. Prices are too high. I don't want to pay over. I'm just going to wait. Well, now prices are $200,000 more than they were 2 years ago. We don't know if it's going to slow down. We don't know what's going to happen. So taking this specific scenario and, okay, do you love the house? Are you willing to pay that price? Are you comfortable with the payment? Can you cover the appraisal gap? It's the wild, wild west, people. Like, appraisals are not what they were before. Unfortunately, values are not what they were before. All of the conventional wisdom that we had about meeting values and prices, right now, this is all market demand. That's how we're pricing properties, based on market demand. So instead of, okay, this is what I can prove on paper, you have to step outside and go, yeah, but I can prove that on paper, but what was this guy willing to pay for it? Or how many houses are there? How desperate are people to buy a house? How far can I push the boundaries? And when you're listing a property, of course, we want to push the boundaries as far as we can. When you're purchasing, you still want to try to get the best deal that you possibly can. But again, right, you have to look at the market demand. Now, doing your research, calling the agent, knowing what the traffic is, checking out comparables, but not just the price of what they were listing for, but what they sold for, what that gap was. What was that gap between listing and sold in the price range that they're in? The listing gap in a lower price range may be higher than what the listing gap is in the higher price ranges. So you've got to know what your gaps are. And so then you know where your client should come in. Now, it's still a good possibility in the market. You can still find properties that people are overpricing that no one is willing to pay for. There are limits that are getting pushed to a point where buyers are like, screw that, I'm not buying that. And no one will come look at it. So that still happens. That's why you've got to do your research to figure out where you should be. Now, something that we talked about, let me find where I just put it because I'm moving stuff everywhere. Oh, right here. Now, I know we have, sorry, I know that's loud. We have a really great conscience when it comes to, but I don't want my client to overpay. I want them to be financially responsible. Like we feel like we have some sort of responsibility for the choices that they make. All we're here to do is to provide the information to them and let them make the choice. That's all we're here to do. So you can give them all the data. If they ask for a recommendation, the recommendation is, what are you comfortable with? Are you okay with the payment? If the market goes down and you lose equity, are you okay with that? Like, give them all the scenarios, because then you don't end up being the bad guy. We talked about this. We don't really have to worry about this one so much, but I mean, for all of us, if you don't want to have the conversation, are you avoiding the conversation? Are you avoiding that confrontation where you're afraid to talk to your client about this, about this topic? Or you're afraid that you're going to look dumb, like you don't know what you're talking about? Do your research and then go in strong. Okay. You still have to allow your client to make their own choices and feel their own feelings. It is their choice. They are grown adults. They can make the choice. So if they want to pay $40,000, $50,000 over on a property, that is their choice. Your job is to tell them, this is what the market demand is, and this is what it takes to win. And if you're happy with this price that it takes to win, and you won't turn around a month later and have buyer's remorse, then great, let's move forward. On any property, we also will have properties where the clients, have you guys had them where you know that the property is going to go overpriced, and you know that if your client doesn't bid a little bit higher, they won't get it? We're going to have that scenario too. In that situation, we have the conversation with the client that sounds more like, okay, I will write up whatever you want me to do. If this is what you want to offer, if this is what you're comfortable with, great. Make sure you give the disclaimer. As long as you're okay, if we do not win, you will not be sad. Like, you won't be like, man, I should have offered more money. As long as you're okay with that, that's great. Because then when we're going through multiple offers with them over and over, sometimes it's not your fault. It lays the responsibility back on them. So, okay, you weren't willing to go another $15,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is. If that's what you were not willing to do, that was their choice. You're just doing what they said. If you don't have the conversation explaining that if they don't win, will they be sad? Are they okay losing the property? You need to fight for them as hard as they want you to fight. And that's the question we have to ask them. Like, how hard do you want me to fight for you on this property? If you don't love it and you're great with it, fine. This is what we'll offer. We may not win. We could win. Who knows? As long as you're not sad. Okay. Whether or not this came from our other class that we had, but it really fit this as well. They just need to take responsibility for their decisions, which we've talked about. This will help keeping you from the buyer, a little bit of buyer fatigue that we get when we're writing multiple offers and the buyers are getting worn out and then they don't want to do it anymore and then you lose them. right? This scenario is going to help, and that conversation is going to help with that. And then, of course, exploring all the options that you can. And that, again, the creativity part of the brain, to where, you know, are there off-market properties? Are there conversations that you can have with other agents or with potential sellers that you can make a situation work? Getting outside what you conventionally would think happens, where a house has to go on the market and then you have to put an offer on it. And then if you don't get the offer accepted, you just do the same thing again and again and again. All right, how about you try to find a listing, and then that listing fits something that your buyer wants, and then you can match your buyer with the seller, and then everybody's happy. What about something like that? Think outside of the original parameters. And then also, this comes into play when you're going to have any conversations with other agents. Don't be afraid to dig in and ask as many questions as you possibly can. So, you know, what the seller situation is, like what they need, what their timeline is it priced? Like, how can you be helpful to them and helpful to the agent, which then benefits your client? And if you see, let's say, like a property, we just had one, a property went off the market. My sister was doing an offer for it for her clients, tough price range in our main city, where our average price is what, $575 now, and this is like a $450 property. And there's usually 8 to 10 offers on those. Well, this house is coming off the market. And so she calls and talks to the agent and said, how come the house came off the market? Well, sure enough, it was only because the house the buyers were buying, it was a whole contingency mess, and it wasn't going to work out. So she said, well, we're going to try again and get under contract on a new one, and then we'll put this house back on the market in a week. She said, great, I can have an offer ready for you. Lined up the situation, made it work for their sellers, make it easy so it lowers their stress level. And sure enough, she doesn't have to compete with anybody. She's getting the house. It's not even back on the market yet. She's got the offer ready. It's in the bag. Now you just lost having to compete with 8 other people because you thought outside of what sounds like logic or the way that things usually go, the way that we should do things.